Hi everyone, today I want to show you the terrain shaders module for the visual engine, and I want to show you some of the features available for the terrain shader, and after that we will try to recreate this setup I did in my scene. So first of all, let's look at this terrain, and the first thing I will show you is the seasons. So in the summer we have this terrain with some green grass, and on top of the mountains we get some snow, and at the water level the terrain is becoming wet. Okay, let's move to spring. In the spring I added some rain. Of course, this is just the visual effect on the terrain. I don't have any particles to better sell the effect, but on the terrain we can add puddles. We have some water drops on the areas which are not covered with water, and on the steeper angles we have some flowing water, and you can see it over here. Then we can go to the winter, and the entire terrain is covered in snow, but at the water level we have this icy effect, and this is a byproduct of the wetness I added at the water level. So this wetness is also affecting the snow, so the terrain is becoming icy in this area. Then if I move back from summer to autumn, the grass is coloring in some orangish color. I exaggerated the effect a bit so we can see the coloring a bit better. And then if I go back to winter, I have a character. I got some free asset from the Unity asset store called InVector third person controller, and if I press play and move around, the character is leaving some footprints in the snow. Okay, and let me show you the material, the terrain material. So if I go to the material, it is using the terrain standard lit shader, and we have a bunch of settings over here. So in the terrain settings we can specify how many layers the terrain is using. For instance, let me go back to the summer and show you some other settings over here. We can change the terrain maps. For instance, it is using a standard of 3 maps, the same maps that the standard Unity terrain is using, but you can also go with a packed setup which is only using 2 textures per layer instead of 3. I will not cover this part over here because I want to record another video in which I will talk more about optimization. Okay, we have the overall terrain shading. We can change the color or control the occlusion, the overall smoothness, and we have the height based blending, which is available in URP and in HDRP, but not in the built-in render pipeline. With the TV shader, this is available in all pipelines, and we have the height-based blending. If the height-based blending is set to 0, the layers are simply faded into each other, but with the height-based blending, this blending is happening based on the height stored in the blue channel of the mask texture of the terrain. I will show you more about that a bit later when we will set up this terrain again. Okay, then TV, it allows you to set per layer mapping. For instance, if the repetition is too obvious on some layer, for instance, this grass is painted on layer 1. So if I go with planar, this is simply mapped in word space, and the repetition can be quite obvious. This is a pretty good texture. The repetition is not that obvious, but you can go with stochastic sampling and the repetition will be gone. This is also called anti-tiling in some other assets. Okay, we have the triplanar mapping, for instance. Let me go to some steeper angle over here. And if I set, the rocks are set to layer 2. So in this one, if I set it to planar, you can see that this rocks is quite stretched on the y-axis. So we can go with triplanar mapping, and now the stretching is gone. All right, we have the global effects we saw earlier. For autumn, I use the tinting. For snow, I use the overlay. For wetness and rain, I use this wetness. The emissive one is not used in this case. And we have the terrain normals. We can use per vertex or per pixel normals. This is to enhance the terrain rendering at a higher distance. This terrain is quite high quality, so we don't see a pretty big difference between them. But if you have a lower quality terrain, or in the distance the terrain is becoming lower resolution, this will help increase the overall quality of the terrain. Okay, and finally on the terrain itself, we have this TV terrain component, which is used. First of all, we need this component so the terrain shader is working, and we can override some of the settings set on the layers. For instance, I have this override for the cliff layer, and I'm overriding the UVs, but only for this terrain, because I don't want to override that layer, because that layer might be used on some other terrains and they are properly set already. So I only want to modify the UVs of this layer, but only for this terrain and not for the others. Okay, and finally TV is also baking a proxy texture for the terrain, and in the distance you can control this base map distance, and at a higher distance we can render this terrain to only use a few textures. Basically it is using only 4 textures instead of 3 textures per layer. So this terrain is having 4 layers at the moment, and it is using 3 textures per layer. So we have 12 textures used for this terrain, but in the distance we can optimize that rendering by simply rendering a proxy of the terrain, and we have an optimized rendering in the distance. All right, so now that I covered what we can do with the terrain shaders, let's get started and let's try to recreate the settings I showed you until now. Okay, so let's start with the basic setup. I have my terrain, I will hide it, and I have the same terrain, but this time this one is using a Unity terrain shader. Okay, so in order to convert this one to TV, all we need to do is to create a new material, and let's call this one TV terrain, and you need to change the shader to box of obic TV landscape terrain standard lit. And on the terrain itself, you need to add the TV terrain component. This component is used to send the terrain textures and the additional terrain data to the shader. Without it, it will not work. So we need to have the TV terrain script. Simply drag this material to the terrain material field over here. And right now, our terrain is using the TV terrain shader. Okay, so the setup is super easy. Let's look again at the terrain settings. If we have only 4 layers or less, you need to set these terrain layers to 4 layers. But if you go higher, you will need to change the layers to a higher number. Okay, we have the maps, we have the packed and the default maps. As I said, I will not cover this one. We have the basic shading over here. We have the occlusion, we have the smoothness. And for the metallic occlusion and smoothness, and for the actual height, TV is using the same shaders that the default terrain is using. So if we go to the layers, let's go to one of the layers over here. The same setup that Unity is using is used for TV as well. So you don't need to worry about repacking your textures or changing the layers, because TV is using the same setup. So your existing terrain will still work with TV. Okay, and so we have the albedo texture, we have the normal texture, and we have this mask map texture, which in TV I call it the shader texture because it is taking care of the shading. And the packing is the same as for the default terrain shaders. So in the red channel we have the metallic, in the green channel we have the ambient occlusion, in the blue channel we have the height, and in the alpha we have the smoothness. Okay, but in the alpha channel TV of the albedo, TV is using this alpha for a multi-mask. We will see that one once we add the tinting feature to the terrain. And we will see it in a bit. Okay, so as I said before, by default we see the tiling of the textures. In order to change that, you can set the per layer mapping, and for the first layer I'm using the grass. So in this case I will add over here the stochastic sampling, and now the repetition is gone. For the second layer, which is the these cliffs, we can see the stretching because the texture is only mapped on the horizontal axis. So again, we can use the triplanar mapping, so the texture is also mapped on the vertical axis. So now if I move the terrain up or down, you can see the triplanar mapping in action. Okay, and let's start first with the tinting to create the season coloring. Okay, with the terrain selected, I will create a new element, and if the terrain is selected, TV is creating an element with the same size as the terrain. So this is perfect for this case, but by default TV is assigning this form surface element type, which is used for blanket, and we need some coloring instead of this one. And for coloring, for the tinting, actually we are using the paint tinting elements. So let's search for paint tinting, and let's set this one to a red color. Okay, so we can see the effect a bit better. Okay, on the terrain material we can go to the tinting, and the tinting is the same as for the default TV materials. And with the tinting enable, we can also enable this use paint elements, and you will notice right now that only the grass is colored and not the rest of the terrain. This is happening because I'm using this multi-mask over here. If this multi-mask is set to 0, then everything is colored. So where is this multi-mask coming from? If you go to the actual terrain layers, on the layer itself we have this specular color, and in TV the specular color is not used, so I repurposed it to be used as multi-mask and as emissive mask, so we can set per layer settings for these global effects. So in the specular alpha channel we can control if a layer is writing to that multi-mask or not, if it is using the multi-mask used for tinting and for dryness or not. So for the grass layers you will need to set this alpha over here to 1 in order to receive the coloring. And as I mentioned, this specular alpha is also multiplied by the albedo alpha channel. So if your layer is having a mix of rocks and grass, for instance, you can filter out the rocks, so the coloring is only applied on the grass and not on the rocks. Okay, let's transform this global element over here, instead of being a single color, to work with seasons, and that's super easy to do. In the render, for the render mode, I will set it to seasons, and now I can set 4 colors for the seasons. So what I did in my previous case, for the spring I set some bright green, and for the autumn I set some yellowish orangish color. And now if I go to spring, this is coloring with the spring colors, and if I go to autumn it is coloring with this autumn color. But what I want to do is I will simply set this or maybe this color over here the alpha of the color to a lower value, so the effect is not that strong. Okay, let's check it real quick. I will not spend too much time on this one. Okay, but we have the colors and we have the global season working. Okay, let's create a new element, and I will control the overlay with that one, so basically the snow. Actually I will first set the overlay and then create the element for it. Okay, so let's go to the overlay settings, let's enable it, and by default TV is using this Atmo mask and Atmo elements, and this Atmo mask is set to 1. It is expecting a global value to be set by the TV manager, and if this global Atmo data over here, the overlay intensity is set to 0, nothing is showing up. If you want an effect to be local, you can simply set this Atmo mask to 0. Okay, and now this effect is becoming local. So for the snow, what I want to do is to enable the maps, and it is using this normal map over here, which is set to default, but the normal map is only used from the green and from the alpha channel. So TV can accept normal maps, set as normal maps, or set as default with sRGB disabled, but with the proper packing it will still work. Okay, let's go back to our terrain and set the tiling of this overlay texture to, actually I will set it to scale and offset, and with scale and offset the tiling is actually the same as the terrain layers, where if you increase the value it will increase the UV. So let's set it to maybe something like 20 and lower this normal to something like this, so we have a smoother overlay, maybe something like this. And I will reduce this smoothness because I think it is a bit too much. Let's enable the glitter, set some tiling for the glitter, maybe a bit higher, and this limit to only show up at a closer distance, so we don't see too much flickering of this effect in the distance. Okay, let's set back this Atmo mask to 1, and let's enable the elements so we can use elements to control the snow. Okay, let's call this one global tinting, and I will duplicate this one and I will call it global snow. Okay, let's clean it up a bit, and I will change this one from paint tinting to Atmo overlay. So we have the Atmo overlay, and we can again set, since this is set to seasons over here, we can set the overlay value per season. So I only want it in winter and not in the spring, summer, or autumn. And now if I move this one around, the season is working, our colors are changing, and everything is working properly. Okay, what I want to do in the summer, I still want to show the snow on the terrain cliffs. So I will duplicate this one, and this will be I don't know, I will leave it like this one. I will move this one below our global snow, and this will be snow for cliffs. Okay, something like that. And the Atmo overlay is having these masking settings over here. With the masking settings, we can set we can use the terrain normal and the terrain height to set a mask for this element to only be applied based on the terrain height or the terrain normal. Let me show it to you. So what I want to do for this season, I will set it to constant, and I want this effect to have a value of 1. And let me disable this one, because this one is rendering on top of that one. So basically I need to set this one below the snow cliff element, because the elements are rendered in top down but they are sorted like Photoshop layers. The one which is on top is rendered on top of the other. So for this one, what I want to do is to use this position masking over here, and right now, based on the terrain height, I can set this global effect for the overlay. What I want to do is to actually invert this effect and use it something like this. So on the higher values of the terrain, it is applying the snow, and on the lower ones it is not. So we can go with something like this. But I can also use the normal of the terrain to mask out this snow. But in order to use this projection mask over here, the terrain need to be instanced. So I need to go to the terrain settings and set it to be instanced. And once this terrain is instanced, the terrain normal is available, and I can use this projection mask over here and remap it. And now I can create this global effect, which is using the terrain height and the terrain normal to create this global effect. This global effect is useful if you place objects on the terrain as well. So I have this sphere over here, and this is not getting any snow if I move it over here, but when I move it in this area where snow is applied, then my sphere is also getting the snow. So basically this effect is global. It is working on terrain and on all the other objects. So in this way I can create global effects for snow, for wetness. I will do the wetness in a moment, in the same way we did with the overlay. Okay, and since this element is below the global snow, when I move this slider to the winter, because this one is on top and this one is below, the season is working as expected. All right, let's create that wetness at the terrain base. So again, with the material, the terrain material, let's go to this wetness, enable it, and again I will enable this to use the Atmo elements, and Atmo mask is set to 1. So if I set the wetness globally, the entire terrain is getting this wetness. But what I want to do, I will again duplicate this Atmo overlay element with the masking and call this one water, and let's call it just simply water level. Okay, and for this one I will use the Atmo wetness element. And what I want to do for the masking, I am not using this projection at all, but I'm using this position over here. And what I want to do is to set a start point and a limit. So I will set this one from 0 to maybe 5, or maybe from 4 or 3 to 5. So everything in this area based on the terrain height is becoming wet. Again, this is a global effect. So if I place this sphere over here, it is getting wet. and if I place one over here, this one is dry. So this is a global effect affecting everything. Okay, again we can enable the rain, and this is controlled by the wetness rainfall intensity. Let's set it to 1, and we need to enable it globally or by using elements. It's up to you. So we have the rainfall over here, and we only have the raindrops because with puddles we need to enable the puddles feature as well. So in the wetness we have the puddle intensity and now we get puddles but on everything. That's because the puddles are using the height mask stored in the layer blue channel, and in TV that blue channel is called the base mask, and we need to remap that base mask over here, so we only apply puddles based on that height. So maybe something like this. It is working quite well. All right, so we covered the tinting, the snow, and the wetness. Let's look at the character controller, and let's create that snow mask, actually those footprints. So I will set this rainfall to 0. I'm not interested in it at the moment, and I will set this winter value to 1. Again, maybe this wetness is a bit too much over here for the water level, so I will decrease this one a bit for 2 and 3. Okay, and what I did for the character, what you can do is to simply create a particle element. So we have the TV element, we need a particle element, and when I move this particle around, it is spawning these particles, and by default it is using the paint tinting feature. If I disable this overlay over here, and if I move this particle around, you will notice that it is coloring the terrain because it is using the paint tinting element. So instead of using the paint tinting, we need the Atmo overlay. So let's call it, let's search for Atmo overlay over here. And what I want to do, when this is painting, now it is painting with snow. So we need to go the other way around and set this value to 0. And if I set this back to winter, now this particle is actually cutting the snow, and the duration and the size of the particle, how the particle is fading out, it is simply controlled by the particle system. So if we want smaller particles, we need to change the size of the particle over here. So instead of using 3, I will use 1, and now it is leaving smaller particles. If we want to change the lifetime of the particle, we have the lifetime, and this is what I did for my character. I set the particles to some smaller values, and for the emission over here, probably I changed the rate over distance number, and for the shape I changed the shape. So instead of spawning those particles from a single point, you can make it spawn from a sphere, and I set this sphere to a small value. And now instead of just leaving a trail, it is actually leaving some more footprints over here. Okay, I will not go and set up the character again because it is made up of a lot of bones, so I need to find the feet and attach this particle to the feet. But basically what I did, I created this element and duplicate it and used one for each feet. But you know that with TV these elements are rendered from top down, and it doesn't really matter if they are placed close to the terrain or at a high distance from the terrain. They are still rendered because they are simply rendered to a render texture, which is then used globally by the shaders. If you want to enable this one and actually to fade out the particles when the player is jumping, we need to enable on the material, on the element material, you can enable this raycast fading, and you can set a if you go to the debug, you will see this line over here, and the particle is only visible if that line is intersecting the terrain. So right now it is not leaving any particles, and if I go closer to the terrain, now it is leaving particles. So you can use this raycast fading, set your terrain to a layer over here. So we optimize the checking of the raycasting. So for instance, I will add a new layer over here. In my case, I will just set it to water, and for the element I will set this layer to water as well, and right now my raycasting will only raycast against this terrain, so it will optimize the actual raycasting. Okay, so this is basically the terrain. I know it is a lot of stuff. Some of the things are quite modular, but this is one way you can set up your terrain with seasons, snow, wetness, and add some footsteps if you want. So I hope this was a useful tutorial, and see you in the next one. Bye.